here we are. This is Sex Love Psychedelics, and I'm your host, Dr. Kat, bringing you psychosexual conversations that will leave you intellectually turned on and hungry for more.
One thing that I noticed about you in your teaching is your ability to, your artistry in weaving the spirituality, the alchemy with BDSM. What brought you to bring those two things together?
I think it was a lot of contemplation. I think I've been a pro dom for 18 years now. And like the first 10 years, it was just the practice, just like, taking a ton of sessions and going through all the motions of being a dom. But then it wasn't until like 8 years ago did I really have my spiritual awakening. Crisis happened. I was outed by my sister and my mom, and like I had to really come out and be out. And that just set in motion like this whole complete shift in my life. And I started to see how the transformations that are happening in my life is actually a mirror of what happens inside the dungeon. And so I started to see that everything inside the dungeon is just this like symbol and metaphor for what's happening outside. And so I started weaving in what I thought were like the alchemy of transformation into BDSM, because I think BDSM allows for us to see that alchemy in the most clear, conscious way. It's like all the elements of BDSM: bondage, discipline, dominance, submission, sadomasochism. I started to break it down, every single element, and see how it looked like outside the dungeon. How is it making the unconscious conscious? And then when I started to see that, I was like, oh, bondage. Inside the dungeon, it's so obvious to us what bondage looks like when we have our hands tied or we are blindfolded and we can't move, can't see, right? That's when we know that we're in bondage. But outside the dungeon, we actually are in bondage. If we are saying what we want to say, doing what we want to do, being who we want to be in every single moment, that means that we have some kind of bondage that's holding us back from being our truest self and our truest self-expression. And that's when I started to see that, oh, if we work on our internal bondage, the bondage that's inside our head, it actually allows us to be in our power. And so my whole journey of coming into our power is really looking at BDSM in this like deeply symbolic way. And so, yeah, just kind of wove in my spiritual journey of transformation into the practice. And then it just goes back and forth between the two.
And when you're working with clients, what does that transformation look like? Like, how do they, so I'm imagining, like in, in therapy sessions or plant medicine sessions, or, ceremonies or whatever it is, there's this container that you're doing this work through, but then there's the integration into life. So how do you see this container that you enter into, these scenes, then translate into their life or integrate into their life, your clients?
I think it all depends on the sub and the clients and where their intentions are and where they want to grow and how they want to transform themselves and see what the blocks are. And so we work together to kind of examine what that bondage is outside of the dungeon. But then what we do in the play is we embed every act, every activity, every tool and implement as part of like a symbol for what's happening for them, how they could take this pain, how they can allow themselves to let go and surrender. Like all of these things are like every single act, everything that they experience and receive becomes a deep symbol and metaphor of what they can actually do outside of the dungeon as well. And so it becomes this thing that's imprinted in them in a very physical way, in a very spiritual, sexual, emotional way. And they can leave that scene feeling like they've went through this whole journey. And again, it's the microcosm of that moment spilling into the macrocosm of their life. And they know that if they could take something that most people cannot take, that means they are limitless in what they think is possible for themselves.
Yeah, you're creating these reference points and really taking these abstract concepts into concrete reality for them.
Mm-hmm.
I see that.
Well, that was fun. Thanks for tuning in, lovers. And if you want to experience more ecstasy and sexual liberation, head over to sexlovepsychedelics.com and learn about how you can join me for any one of my online or live events. And while you're there, grab my free guide on sex and psychedelics. Remember, this podcast is for entertainment and educational purposes only. Please contact your healthcare provider and local law before pursuing any of the products or psychedelics discussed. And one final note here. I make this show specifically for you. If you're loving the show, then be sure to leave me a review in iTunes or Spotify to let me know. Happy to be here and happy to serve. I'll see you next time on Sex Love Psychedelics.